Welcome to X-Men issue number 19, which is a crossover event with the Brood versus the Marvel Universe. And this issue opens with Forge and Penance preparing to enter a Krakoan gate to nowhere. Now, let me give you some context on why this is a big deal. Because as of right now, Nowhere was sucked into a black hole way before Krakoa was revealed, which usually would mean that it would have been impossible for Nowhere to house a Krakoan gate. But due to some quick thinking, Forge asked Cable if he could give him a ride back in time right before Nowhere disappeared so he could plant a gate for future use, which was precisely what Cable did. So once Forge initially arrived on Nowhere, he made sure he wasn't spotted to avoid any future paradoxes. So with that said, before Forge descended into the void, they thought that they should probably ask two of the smartest mutants their opinion on the matter, which both Sage and Prodigy pretty much came to the same conclusion, which was that they were most likely going to die. But with Forge being Forge, he still decided to journey through the gates into a black hole in the hope to see where Nowhere ended up. And once in the gate, the two were not prepared for what they witnessed, because almost instantly both their bodies went numb as strange visions flashed before their eyes. So as Forge and Penance tumbled through the black hole, we skipped over to the main X-Men team arriving on the world where Corsair's distress call came from. And one of the first things Jean Grey notices is that the Brood is everywhere. So with that realization, time is of the essence. So without wasting any time, the team split up into three groups. Cyclops, Talon, and Synch will make their way into the building to find Cyclops' father, Corsair, while Jean Grey and Magik track down their old friend Brood to find out what is going on. And finally, Iceman and Firestar are assigned to eliminate as many members of the Brood infestation as possible without holding back. So with everyone knowing what part they play, the team springs into action. And the first group we follow is that of Iceman and Firestar. And these two are putting in some work without worrying about holding back, which is a huge game changer for these two. Because all Firestar's life she was told to slow down, watch out, and not to exert too much power. But in a situation like this, she is free to go all in, which in her words feels really good to be able to cut loose. So after dispatching the Brood in the nearby area, both Firestar and Iceman make their way to the next cluster of the infestation. But while they are traveling, Firestar raises a question for Iceman. And this question is the same question that was asked for years. And that was, do you think the name X-Men is sexist? And does he believe it should be changed? Which Iceman replies by saying, I'll tell you what I tell everyone when they ask me that. Which is, go see what Jean Grey thinks. And with those words, we skip over to both Jean Grey and Magik. And they just made their way to Brew Laboratory. And almost immediately red flags begin to go off. Because Jean Grey states that Brew would never leave his scientific gear like this. So with no hesitation, Jean Grey used her mutant ability to reach out to several telepaths in order to recruit some help in tracking down Brew, which is where they get their first real break in the search, because both Emma Frost and Psylocke confirm that Brew is indeed not on Earth, but the Stepford Cuckoos mentioned that they scanned a mind of a mutant who saw the missing man at Prometheus Bay 2 days prior. So with that information, both Magik and Jean Grey teleport to Arakko. So as Jean and Magik is doing that, we transition over to Cyclops, Synch, and Talon making their way through a dark hallway in search of Corsair. But while they were traveling, Cyclops let it be known that this route will most likely be a trap, because up to this point they haven't reached any resistance along their journey. So right on cue, a giant Brood hopped out from the shadows and attacked our team. But unfortunately for it, the attack was short-lived as Cyclops let out a massive blast right through its body, killing it immediately. So with the threat out of the way, Talon picks up the scent of Cyclops' father, Corsair, behind a bulkhead. So before she cut down the door, she tells Cyclops that he should steel himself before they enter, because most likely Corsair will be in rough shape. And just as predicted, Corsair was on the floor writhing and extreme pain as he was impregnated with a Brood egg. So with this shock, Cyclops ran to his father's side in concern as his father tried to make light of the situation by saying, thought there ought to be one more summer brother before I catch the last chip out. So with Corsair found, the Brood sprung their trap by attacking from all angles. So using Jean's gift, Synch uses her ability to cut the first Brood head clean off. So with time wasting and more Brood on their way, Cyclops prepared his optic laser as he was about to cut his father open to eliminate the egg. But luckily cooler heads prevailed as Talon stepped between them. because during her time in the vault, both her and Synch had to operate on each other several times over for hundreds of years. So jumping into action, she tells Synch that she needs Jean Grey gifts to pull this off. So like clockwork, both Cyclops and Synch switched roles as Synch assisted in the surgery and Cyclops let out his frustration on the Brood. So while Cyclops did his thing, Synch used Jean's power to detach Corsair's mind from his body as Talon began the operation. And once the body was opened, Synch had to turn on the afterburners as he had to not only detach Corsair's mind, but he also had to put the parasite to sleep to avoid it from moving, as well as keep the body itself from dying. So as all that was going on, Cyclops continued to cut down wave upon wave of the infestation, until something unforeseen happened. Because the parasite that was once asleep awoke as it was being lifted out of the body, and in a blur, the creature bit into Talon's arm. So in a mad dash, Synch once again used his ability to freeze it in midair while he dealt with Corsair. And in a blink of an eye, Talon cut the creature into fourths. So with the creature dealt with, the team still wasn't out of the woods yet, because Synch had to push himself even further by channeling telekinesis to move the massive body. So with Corsair secured and ready for transport, the team made their way down the hallway at top speed toward the extraction point, while taking out any member of the Broods they saw along the way. So upon exiting the building, Cyclops and his team ran directly into Iceman and Firestar, which they state that despite all the Brood they took down, they ultimately hardly made a dent. So in order to strategize their next moves, Iceman erected an ice barrier to provide cover. So while inside, Iceman asked Synch if he could create some step disc for them to use to escape, in which Synch responded by saying he could, until he was interrupted by Talon saying, every time Synch reaches for a power not within arm's length, he begins to rapidly age. Now, this was news to the rest of the team because up to this point, Synch was keeping it a secret. So with the cat out of the bag, the team had to think of a plan B. So while all that was going on, we switched over to Forge and Penance. And when we get there, we discover their trip through the black hole was a success because they found their way to nowhere. But in a strange twist, when they arrived, they were met by two bodies on the floor wearing the exact same uniform as them. So with curiosity in the air, Forge reached down and turned over the body, only to be met by their own faces. So of course at first they freaked out, until Forge came to the conclusion that their consciousness must have been ejected from their body. So with that mystery solved for the moment, Penance made her way to a glowing door only to be met by yet another surprise. For in space was Nowhere's severed head. But this Nowhere was not of their universe. So with that said, this issue comes to an end.